The one-child policy came about when the government wanted to control the rapid population increase in China. China has had a history of overpopulation. China's population at the founding of the Ming Dynasty in 1368 stood close to 60 million, approaching 150 million by the end of the dynasty in 1644. As China emerged from the social disruptions and economic stagnation of the Cultural Revolution, its government launched market reforms to revitalize the economy. In 1979, recognizing that population control was essential to raise living standards, the one-child family policy was introduced. This policy limits family size. The one-child rule applies only to urban residents and government employees. Economic incentives for compliance, substantial fines, confiscation of property, and loss of job are used to enforce the policy. The policy is based on universal access to contraception and abortion. The one-child policy had an impact on population growth. The fertility rate decreased from 2.9 in 1979 to 1.7 in 2004. This has resulted in urban families with one child and rural families with 2 children. However, the fertility rate had already decreased from 5.9 in 1970 to 2.1 in 1979 under the voluntary late, long, few policy of postponed childbearing, greater spacing between children, and fewer children. With the implementation of the one-child policy, there was a further fall to 1.7 by 1995. The Chinese government is aware of the need to balance the people's right of reproduction with the national need to limit population growth. The policy could be relaxed only if fertility aspirations would not result in a baby boom. Surveys do show that China may be changing to a small family culture. The massive change over the last 25 years makes it harder for the government to enforce the policy. Finally, the evidence of slowing population growth, the high sex ratio, the increasing number of elderly people, and the risks associated with avoidance of medical care by women with unapproved pregnancies suggest that a relaxation of the one-child policy would be desirable. However, in 2002, the government announced that there would be no fundamental policy change. Together with declining fertility aspirations have reduced the tensions associated with the government's efforts to control population growth, and have allowed the government to adopt a gradual approach to relaxing the one-child policy. The original intent of the one-child policy was economic, to reduce the demand of natural resources, maintaining a steady labor rate, reducing unemployment caused from surplus labor, and reducing the rate of exploitation. The CPC's justification for this policy was based on their support of Mao Zedong and his supposedly Marxist theory of population growth. The one-child policy in China also caused a problem called the 4-2-1 problem. As the first generation of law-enforced only children came of age for becoming parents themselves, one adult child was left with having to provide support for his or her 2 parents and 4 grandparents, called the 4-2-1 problem. This leaves the older generations with increased chances of dependency on retirement funds for charity in order to receive support. If personal savings, pensions, or state welfare fail, most senior citizens would be left entirely dependent upon their very small family or neighbors for assistance. If for any reason the single child is unable to care for their older adult relatives, the oldest generations would face a lack of resources and necessities. In response to such an issue, certain provinces maintained that couples were allowed to have 2 children if both parents were only children themselves. As of 2009, all provinces in the nation adopted this new adoption. However, a majority of women in Jiangsu province eligible for a second child would voluntarily only have 1 child, according to a 2010 survey. China, like many other Asian countries, has had a long tradition of son preference. The commonly accepted explanation for son preference is that sons in rural families may be thought to be more helpful in farm work. Both urban populations have economic and traditional incentives. Sons are preferred as they provide primary financial support for the parents in their retirement. and a son's parents typically are better cared for than a wife's. In addition, Chinese traditionally holds that daughters on their marriage become primarily part of the groom's family. Male to female sex ratios in the current Chinese population are high in both rural and urban areas. So in conclusion, the one-child policy has proved to be very beneficial to China, but could also be viewed as a deterrent in some ways.